For those of you, wasn't that incredible to see God do such an amazing thing in the lives of families in our community? Well, this morning, let's welcome our friends Stuart and Kellee Hall. Thank you guys so much for being here with us. So many answers to prayer, such an incredible thing that has taken place. And so first, I just want to thank you for being here with us. We talked a little bit about John. Pastor John really wanted to be here for this moment, and so I'm here. So he was going to share his backstory with you, and so I want to share with our church and with you. You know, my first introduction to you was Big Stuff Camp when I was a high school student, and hey, we got some Big Stuff Camp fans in here. That's right, yeah, some of you have been. And
is this your attempt at age shaming me? Is that
no, not at all. No, okay. You haven't aged a bit, Stuart. You haven't aged a bit. But but going, I remember, I thought it was so cool that I could hear somebody talk and have me hurting laughing, and then hurting with a gut punch from Jesus. One right out, it's like boom, boom, you know, and just this.
I don't think gut punch and Jesus should be in the same sentence, but keep going.
Sounds like one of those 90s Christian rock bands, you know, gut punch Jesus, now on K-Love. Anyway, sorry, might be more of that. But to hear you, and one of the things that I'll never forget was you were speaking on wise choices that week at camp. And it brought this thing. It's not what's good or bad, not what's right or wrong, but what is the wise thing to do. To elevate your decision making to that sort of perspective. And that never left me. I mean, I've sat through so many different messages, but when I went to college, that was the paradigm that I would think through. When I got married at 20 years old, didn't have a clue. That was what I would try to do and failed oftentimes. But learning through every stage of my life, it oftentimes went back to that very question. And so I just appreciate you. Your influence in my life has been extraordinary from the time, I mean, when I would have a message and trying to learn how to communicate, I would take it, write it, or send it to you, get an audio of it, send it to you, and it didn't matter how busy you were, within the next day or two, I would get a full, hey, here's where you need to fix, and here's where you get better, and that sucked and didn't make sense, but this was really good. I mean, you gave me all of those things I needed to continue to grow, so I just appreciate you, and Kellee, I love your family, and just getting to know you over the years as well, and so just thank you guys for being here.
Well, as said this first service as well, it's not difficult to be your fan. It's not like, he's really bad, but I should build him up. That wasn't what I was doing at all. And I also would applaud your incredible use of wisdom, because if somehow you convince Tanya to marry you,
absolutely,
that's
100%.
Bro, you're a snake charmer. But more than anything else, before we get started, if I could, I just want to thank the great people of this faith community is in large part the reason why I'm still alive. There's no question in my mind. It was the prayers and love of people like you guys. There's really no explanation for why I'm still here, especially when you consider 180,000 plus people have not survived COVID, and for some reason I did. But we will never be able to thank you guys enough for loving Kellee and our children and praying for me. And I mean, we received so many cards and letters and DMs and texts, and it's just really, really appreciated. So thank you.
We appreciate you. I mean, I was sharing this, that you've been a part of our renovation family from the very beginning. And even before the church got started, Stuart, there was some of the more funny conversations, or how many times you were like, doggone it, Pastor John, lead a church, start a church, get things moving. And from the very early days, coming back year after year and being a part. And to the people of renovation, what was so amazing was you shared in that love that Pastor John and myself have for you. Because if there was a day that went by that we didn't post an update, I mean, our phones were blowing up, and they were like, hey, what's going on? What have we heard today from Stuart? And that was you checking in, and so just an amazing journey for sure. And here's what's interesting is last year when you came and spoke, you spoke on the idea of the opposite of shallow is deep, because deep is personal. And Kellee, when you sent this text to John that said, Stuart, this is a situation and it doesn't look good. I mean, that whole principle got very real very fast, because you, for me, and I think for many of us here, you were the first person we knew, right, that was experiencing this thing the way that you were. And it became very personal for all of us. And that was what we said, okay, now we get to practice exactly what we had talked about a year earlier in our family series, to being personal, to praying for, to being there for, and to loving on. And so, but I'm just so glad to have both of you here. And this morning we're going to talk about several things. We are going to talk a little bit about the COVID experience, but also we're entering into a series called This Is Us. And this series is a family series. This time every year, as kids are going back to school, we take this time to kind of bring the family together and go, what does God have for us as a family? And encourage families, encourage parents and grandparents and aunts, uncles, cousins, people who have influence in the family. But then this also has two parts to it. There is our personal families, but then there's the church family. And how is the church supposed to carry through this together? How are we supposed to carry out this mission that God has set before us, to love people, to love Him, and to change the world? Because how do all of these things how all these things work? And the passage that we're going to surround a lot of this series in, and the idea of it, is in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And there were many times in history when we go through the Bible that God would use leaders to pull people back together. Hey, round everybody up, bring them back together. There's something important that you need to know. You got to bring your families in here because there's some direction that I want you to go in, but I need to set you up. And Moses does this in this moment before the people are about to go into the promised land. And he gathers everybody, and this is what he says. He says, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. And you must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I'm giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home, and when you are on the road, and when you are going to bed, and when you are getting up. Tie them to your hands and wear them on your foreheads as reminders. Write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates." And so what we see throughout Scripture is this big idea, this central theme that we want to talk about, and it's this: the most important thing you could ever do for your family is help them see that God is the most important thing. And that is the drive of the drive of our conversation. We've decided this time to take our 4-week series for families and actually extend it out 8 weeks, because understanding that none of our families are the same this time last year, right? I mean, they have changed dramatically, some more than others, but we want to make sure we're giving this time to what has God called us to as a family unit: mom, dad, kids, grandparents, but also the church family as well. And so if you're joining us, I'm just going to kind of bring us up to date on the COVID journey with Stuart. And that was, Stuart in March was diagnosed with COVID and really experienced the worst of it. And there were literally, the reason that you are here is a miracle of God. And it is the answer to prayer, the miracle of God, experiencing near total organ failure, and I mean, just to its end. The trauma that you, from outside the hospital, and your family navigating through. And we are just so thankful that you're here, that you're with us. But as we get into our first question, because today's going to be more like a Q&A, what has God taught you through COVID? What has God taught you through this experience? Because you don't come out of one of these the same, for sure. But what has God taught you?
Don't get it.
Don't get it.
Kellee, wear your mask. Don't get it.
I think, first of all, I want to say thank you as well. You guys just loved our family in a way that was amazing and totally unexpected. I think my children were just overwhelmed at the DMs they would receive, the shares they would receive, the concern, the cares, every bit of it. It was literally overwhelming. So thank you so much for just stepping in the middle and helping us, even though you didn't even know me, you didn't know my children, and you knew Stuart only. But it meant everything, and it made the biggest difference in our life. Something I think, first of all, yes, our life's changed, but everybody's life's changed.
Yeah.
This is not something that has only become personal to us. It's become personal to everyone in some way, form, or fashion. I think the biggest thing that we were already discussing before the pandemic hit, and something that became even more clear, Stuart's dad passed away in January. So then we had gone through in February, another really close family situation, bad thing that had happened. So we had already been dealing with a lot of like trauma and trying to figure out, God, what are you doing? And then this happens in March. And I think certainty was one of the biggest things that he was already teaching us, but clarified even more through the whole process of, there's only one thing you can be certain in. There's only one thing you can put the weight of your certainty on, and that's the person of Jesus. Because everything else within a moment is going to change. My company totally went to nothing within a month's time. The part of his business that he communicates, I mean, his entire summer and probably up to 6 months was just gone. The whole 2020 just gone, and we're just like, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of uncertainty, not only in his health, but also in our finances, in our life, our future. Like it was affected in so many different ways. But it just became really clarified that there's only one thing we can wake up every morning and put our weight of our trust in. The next thing was humanity, and how the kindness of these people, the healthcare workers for us, and the churches all across the country that were reaching out just like you guys were and stepping in the middle and praying for us. That was overwhelming to see these healthcare workers that didn't know us, didn't know anything about us, were not in a personal relationship with us, but were willing to go to work every day and to stand in the middle and to fight for our loved one when they're putting their lives and their families' lives on the line as well, to be able just to show up. That was overwhelming in the midst of all this.
Great.
I think I've become really, really, really keenly aware of just how much grace is extended to us every day. And it doesn't take you being near death multiple times within the course of a month. If we could just pick our head up and understand that the fact that all of us in this room, you woke up this morning, there was breath in your lungs. That's a gift. And we get buzzing through life and we don't see it.
Yeah.
And then you take that grace and you multiply it tenfold as it relates to the miracle. And we've done plenty of other interviews. You can go and check those out. But there was a point in my health crisis when I was in a medically induced coma in ICU and we didn't find out about this until a month after we came home. But there were 6 doctors standing around my bed going, what do we do? He's dying. We don't know what to do.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis said that miracles are a story written in small letters that is being told in large letters across the universe, too big to be seen. Like the miracle of my having breath in my lungs this morning is just God going, I want you to see this. But this is happening all the time. The fact that this woman agreed to marry me is a miracle. Like, this is the secret sauce, in case you do not know.
Yeah.
But like, even as a husband and as a father, I can lose sight of that. So it's that. And then the last thing I would say is the essence of faith has changed. Like God has completely shifted, because if we're really, really honest, most of us in this room and most of us watching and listening, we've made this subtle shift in the American church from belief being a who word to being a what word. We make everything about what it is that we believe. And the reality is faith is a who word.
Yeah.
Much like what Kellee said about what are you leaning the full weight of your existence on. And to watch men and women, to echo what she said about healthcare workers, you know, James, the brother of Jesus, said, you show me your faith, I'll show you my deeds. I'll show you what I do.
Yeah.
You keep talking about what you believe, and I'll put feet to my faith, and we'll get to the end and see which is better. To watch men and women put feet to their faith. And this will mess with you, not only spiritually, emotionally, but it'll mess with you theologically. Many of them who don't have the same belief system that I have.
Yeah.
But to literally, like she said, risk their life to keep me alive.
Yeah.
I just can't be the same after that. We can't be the same after that. That's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah, and that's so good. And last night, even at dinner, we talked about, you know, where they are in their faith or not. Isn't it incredible to see the people made in the image of God? Just to have them around you in those moments was just such a great and an incredible thing. And so I want to just, we've got a picture here, you know, Stuart, when we saw this picture, Kellee, when we saw this, I know for me personally, when I saw that picture, it was just, I mean, tears to my eyes. Like, you know, this is you outside the hospital and you're able to kiss your wife, to see your kids.
It's really, really hard to get a good kiss with masks on. I still have fiber on my tongue.
It's not going anywhere. It keeps showing back up.
But it is a great memory.
Yeah.
No, that was an incredibly special moment. And it was, you know, and I don't want us to get bogged down in the weeds here, but that was a really, really emotional moment for us as a family. The reason why our palliative care doctor arranged that to happen, it really wasn't supposed to happen, but the doctors were concerned I had neurological issues, and so they had finally convinced me that I was going to have to go to acute physical therapy, which would mean that once I was discharged from the hospital, I would get in an ambulance and go to another facility for a couple of weeks. Kellee's known for a long time I have neurological issues, but that's a whole other thing. But I needed to be able to tell my kids, our kids, that I was going to be okay.
I think we have a picture.
Yeah,
Next
and so
picture up there.
Yeah, that was a very, very special, and it wound up being more special because 2 days. Well, actually, at the end of this whole thing, by the time I got back up to my room, the doctors had changed their mind, and 2 days later, I came home. Wow. So, yeah, that's special to us, for us to be able to remember that.
Absolutely, Kellee. What are your thoughts when you in that moment?
I knew, like, he was really struggling whether he would, he was fighting them about going to acute therapy, and I already knew they had been talking to me about it for about a week, about him needing to go, and I just knew, like, if he could see us, if he could literally touch us, then he'd be okay. He'd make the right decision, whatever that was. And it was so kind that the palliative care doctor just said, she figured it out, a way that we could meet him outside, you know, to be able to do that. And yeah, it was a special moment. It was, and that was the first time the kids, I had actually got to go to ICU and see him one day for 45 minutes. And that was the first time I saw him in probably in about 3 weeks. And this was the first time the kids had seen him in about a month. And, you know, the last time they saw him, we were leaving the hospital thinking, this is it, when we dropped him off. So it was an incredibly special moment of that. And then I'm thinking to myself, because he comes home the next like within 2 days, and I'm going, oh, great, you're giving him back to me. I almost killed him the last time I had
It's like
now
I
gotta take
I'm a
him
very
home.
large infant.
You're a very large man-child.
Man-child, exactly right. Carry me up the stairs, Mommy.
It's that same feeling we all have when we brought our
as
first kid home.
parents.
You know, you're like,
Yeah.
oh,
we're
what
so
else?
excited they're alive. Oh, God, we brought life into the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
He
like,
has to
now
eat.
I'm responsible for taking his blood pressure, for checking his
Yeah.
blood oxygen level, for checking,
Yes.
making sure he has all
She
10
literally
of
would
his
take my blood pressure 10
prescriptions.
times a day. I'm like, are we playing house? What are we doing?
As well as he
That's
can
good.
barely get up the stairs and,
Yeah.
get a shower. So
Yeah.
it was a lot.
Literally,
It
this
was
is
a
no
lot.
exaggeration. The first month, I could only manage to go downstairs and upstairs one time.
Wow.
So I would come downstairs for the day and then go back because I would just be exhausted.
Yeah.
And so she's not exaggerating. It was that much of a burden on her. So thanks for hanging in there with me.
One of the things I loved too was I quickly saw your sense of humor was still there when I was on Instagram and somebody we both follow had a picture of a baby deer that was just born trying to walk. And so I'm looking through the comments and I see your comment. What was your comment on that one?
That's exactly how I look in physical therapy.
Right. Yeah.
Like just because I had to
Yeah.
relearn how to walk.
Yeah.
And, I was a college athlete and I mean, you literally feel like a complete failure.
Yeah.
But it's been amazing to see how quickly like muscle memory and all that. So yeah, I'm very grateful. Very grateful.
Well, we're so grateful. And church, here's what I want to do. I mean, so many times I think in our Christian life, we pray for something, but yet we're so busy that we don't give time to thank God and to celebrate for it. So right now, we're just going to thank God for what he has done in Stuart's life. Prayers being answered, just that moment of just celebration. It's just so good. And I just, take time on your own just to thank God for answered prayers. Because I just think that that's so important. But we're going to transition a little bit now and talk.
Can I say one thing
Yeah,
about
absolutely.
that?
You can say whatever you
I
want.
didn't say it last service, so this
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
little add-on. But about not forgetting,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't say this about the healthcare workers, but the first weekend that he was there in the hospital, one of the nurses came back and put a heart in his window
Yeah.
so that we'd know where he was in the hospital, and we'd sit out in the parking lot, which was the kindest, like for her, it was like no big deal, but for us, it was like life. Well, we brought the heart home with us, and we had all the healthcare workers sign the heart before we came home. And we hung the heart. We've got it framed now, and we've got it hung in our living room just for that reason, that we won't forget what God did, and we won't forget what these people did on behalf of him.
Yeah.
So,
That's incredible.
anyway.
Absolutely. I'm a little
In a
biased to
celebration.
healthcare workers too, because I'm married to one. So, but yeah, and one of the
Make sure he
things,
doesn't hang you on the wall.
one of the things, Stuart, that we love about having you here is you're not just a great communicator of just truth and God's word, but also you're a practitioner. And so you are constantly studying what's going on in the church, what is going on with the next generation, where are we headed as a church, right? So the thermostat of so many times of where the church is going is what's taking place in teenagers' lives right now. And you've been on this for decades at this point. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do, if you would, that as we're looking at things, church and faith seem to be in a bit of a crisis right now. And it's probably been accelerated even more as a result of the pandemic. But give us a little bit of insight into what you're seeing and what research is showing us as far as the church and the family is concerned.
That's a great question. I think the one thing that the pandemic did for us personally as a family is it allowed for a stress test of our belief system. I think anytime you face adversity, and I would really recommend to every mom and dad in the room that there is this counterintuitive intuition about us as parents that we want to protect our children from stress tests. But the reality is you never really know how strong you are unless your belief system has been tested. So the pandemic and my health crisis especially did that, not only for me and for Kellee, but especially for our kids. but it also has done that for the capital C Church in America.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is the way that that's kind of shown itself is a lot of verbiage in public about returning to be able to meet in places of worship and that kind of thing. And what's interesting about that, in fact, I brought a graph for you to look at from the Barna Research Group. What's interesting about that is if you pay careful attention to what Dave Kinnaman and his team at Barna says here or shows here, church attendance has been in a steady decline for a while, which begs the question, why are so many parents complaining about not being able to meet in church when you haven't been going anyway?
Yeah.
So that's number one, and that's not for me to scold us.
Right.
I think it's important, too, to have a bit of revisionist history. One of the reasons why we love to champion that narrative is because we love to think of our country in certain ways. And obviously, a large part of our country's founding was for the sake of religious liberty. But the interesting thing as it relates to church attendance is that the time in our country's history when church was attended the most consistently was right after World War II. And the time in our country's history when it was attended the least consistently was right after the American Revolution, where we won the war to have religious liberty.
Yeah.
So let's make sure we pump the brakes on that a little bit, because that's the reality. Plus, this is screaming at us as well. And then the other thing that I think is even more important is, let's go way past this. After Jesus died and rose from the dead, and I've talked about this here before, the first 300 years of our faith's existence was the largest expansion of our faith in the history of Christianity. The most biblical historians believe that by 100 AD, there were about 120,000 Christ followers on the planet. 250 years later, some estimate upwards of 36 million Christ followers on the planet. And this is what should rattle us all. That many people in a 250-year period decide to start following Jesus. There's no lights. There's no band. There's no swollen speaker who's obviously been in the gym. There's no Bible as we know it.
Yeah, right.
Which begs the question, what were those men and women doing that caused Christianity to explode? And one of the primary things that they were doing, for those of you that don't know, in that period in the world, there were tons of plagues. And especially in the early stages as Christianity began to expand out of Judea, there were all of these plagues. And when there would be plagues, people of no belief system or pagan belief systems would run. Christians would run too. They would be the ones to go and help the sick. And I think it screams, to give it handles and practically for us, that reality screams this: that somehow, some way, moms and dads who were people of the way, that's what Christians were called, realized that they are, and here's a heads up for all of us in this room, we will always be, mom and dad, the primary spiritual influence in the life of our child. We always will. It does not matter where you are on your spiritual journey, on the spiritual spectrum. You as a father, you as a mother, your parents are taking their spiritual cues from you. I think that's what we have to wrestle with more than, the average attendance of a core family is once a month. We have to wrestle with, it's much like the diversity issue. If you want to have a diverse church, you need to have a diverse dinner table. Well, if you want to have a church that is exploding with Jesus and spirit power, it has to happen at home. So I think that's what I think about when I think about this. The last thing I would say, too, is that a part of what has happened in America, like if I'm unbelievably thirsty, I could pick up this bottled water, but the dumbest thing that I could do is to lick the bottle. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Religion and churchiosity is like licking the bottle. And no wonder people stop coming or only come once a month. We've got to open up the bottle and drink deep. And that starts at home.
Yeah, that starts at home. That's so great. Kellee, I want to bring you into this conversation. You know, you work a lot with Gen Z. I mean, these are the students and they're in our areas of influence. I mean, if we were to have them on that graph, I mean, we're going to continue to see that. You're a mom of Gen Z kids. You are a coach at your church of teaching small group leaders and how to work with Gen Z in this next generation. When you hear what we've just talked about and you're looking at it, what are your thoughts from a mom of Gen Z kids and from somebody who's very invested in the next generation when it comes to this?
When I think about Gen Z, I think of nothing but pride, and I want to stand and applaud them. And I think as a mom that I've got to figure out how to join them and how to celebrate them and be a student of them. And I think that's something Stuart and I have done for years now, especially as soon as our son probably went to college, but probably before that, just trying to be a student of him and then also of our daughters, of just trying to figure out what's in their mind, what beats in their heart, what are they passionate about. And I think Gen Z is a generation that is not willing to stand by and just allow the same thing that my generation, your generation, and the generations before us have been willing to just stand by and allow to be okay. And they're going, no, you don't have the courage to do it. Well, I am. And it's exciting. I don't look at them as whiners or entitled. I look at them as world changers, and that they want to be different. And because of that, I'm super proud of mine, and all of them are on different journeys of life, spiritually and other ways. And it's my job as a parent to find out and to figure out what that journey is and to join them there. Sometimes it's to guide them. Sometimes it's just to sit back and to celebrate them and allow their truth to be their truth. So if we as a generation of parents will view Gen Z as in this light, I think it changes our hearts and our minds and if you have a sense of irritation, of not understanding what they're actually going through. We don't have an idea of what this generation is actually experiencing and walking in. And you put them in a pandemic. You've taken away everything from them. The certainty of their school, their friends, their sports, everything is taken away from them. And what I think they're willing to do, and we're willing to get, if we're willing to get behind them and help with their courage, is to teach them they can do hard things. We can all do hard things. We're all doing hard things, and we can do this. We can face truth and be okay.
That's good. And one of the things that we've even experienced here, I mean, we have people that work on our teams and they're Gen Z, and they are just they get hyper focused on doing things well. I mean, I think of Jackie sitting right over here, serves in our kids area. I mean, there's no stopping her from making sure that the kids she's leading and reaching are being impacted, and they're being impacted by the gospel of Jesus. Like, that's when we're seeing them. Yes, there is that opinion of them that is other, but man, the ones that I get a chance to work with and I get to see, I'm blown away at their capacity to go, doesn't matter, I'm moving forward. Like, we're going to carry this forward. And as we look at this whole thing, we've got church attendance on the decline. Gen Z is important because they're the next carriers of the church, honestly, is what that looks like. But But how should we as parents, how should we as leaders, as parents, respond to this reality? I mean, what are the things that need to take place with us as parents, knowing the trends that are taking place, knowing what's happening with this crisis between church and family? What are parents? What do we need to do?
There's a guy that I really, really respect who he says that, and I think this pairs so well with what we're talking about for us as moms and dads. He talks about the fact that the signature of mediocrity is not an unwillingness to change. There is not a parent in this room who cares about their kid and knows that there's a God that doesn't think the most important thing for their kid is their relationship with God. There's not a mom and dad who sit with those two realities and go, nah. So there's not an unwillingness to change for all of us as parents, including Kellee and I. There's not an unwillingness to change. He says the signature of mediocrity is not an unwillingness to change. The signature of mediocrity is chronic inconsistency.
Yeah.
And that's where I think our challenge is. We are chronically inconsistent. Part of the reason why we as parents are chronically, and I'm talking specifically spiritually, part of the reason why we are chronically inconsistent spiritually is because I think we've done a very poor job framing New Testament faith. Like, let me illustrate it to you this way. If you consider what Moses tells the people of Israel, and he starts going through that list of tie it on your head, talk about it when they go to sleep, talk about it when they wake up, talk about it at breakfast, talk about it in the car, talk about it when they come home. All of us in this room as parents are going, okay, I'm already feeling overwhelmed. You know what I do when I feel overwhelmed? Nothing.
Right. Yeah.
You know how I felt the first time I walked into physical therapy, having lost 30 pounds, and I couldn't even lift the bar. You should understand this, steroid boy. I couldn't even juice much. I couldn't even lift the bar. So there was this part of me that's going, I want out.
Sure. Yeah.
But what I had to do, and what I think we all have to do as parents, is we have to move forward and take a small step. And here's one small step. One small step is, let's have an accurate definition of what New Testament biblical faith is. And an accurate definition of what biblical New Testament faith is believing that God is who Jesus showed him to be, who Jesus told us he was, and who Jesus exemplified God to be. And that he'll do everything he's promised he'll do. The greatest inspiration that I have had from Kellee and our kids with my COVID situation was how she prayed. You can see it even, I mean, this is difficult for me to do to this day, and I don't know, Joey, if I'll ever be able to do it. But you can see it even in the Instagram stories and the Twitter feed. From the get-go. Kellee's whole thing was, God, I believe that you can heal my husband. I just don't know if you will.
Wow. Yeah.
And the reason why is because, and this is tough for some of us, God never promises us that he'll heal us. Says he can, doesn't mean that he will. But watch what that does to how you pray. Because the other way, have you ever been around someone that yells at God when they pray?
Those Hollywood movies.
Right.
Yeah.
First of all, that's your father, and I know what would happen to me if I yelled at my dad.
Right. Yeah.
Number two, usually we're yelling at him to do something that he's never promised us he'll do.
Yeah, true.
But when you recognize, I don't know if you will do this, I know you can. What does that do? It puts you immediately in a position of submission. Here's a word, trust. And so I think that's a small, tiny step that all of us as parents have to wrestle with. Do we have an accurate definition of what it means? Because believing, moms and dads, ladies and gentlemen, is a who word. It's not a what word. It's who do you believe in? It's not what do you believe about?
Yeah.
Start there. That would be the handle I hope and pray moms and dads would grasp. Would you agree with that? I hope.
Of course. I think the only other thing I would add to that would be choose to love. I think right now, that is our one and greatest commandment from the life of Jesus and that he gave us is to love. And that love comes in so many different ways, forms, and fashions right now. One form is wearing a mask. I mean, that's simple, but it's also like for us, it was considering the healthcare workers over ourselves when we would call and just say, "What's your name? We want to pray for you. We want to just thank you for what you're doing on behalf of our loved one." It's just considering the other before yourself, even though we were broken and in a broken situation. And because of that, I feel like it gave us some leverage moving down the road, even with the people that we came in contact with, from text messages or direct messages that we might get from families, or even to this day from the healthcare workers that were actually with him, asking us to pray for them, telling us that they are actually experiencing something really hard in their life, and because of his courage and the hope that Stuart gave them, that they're able to face it, or that hope in God that they never had before. There's so many different avenues that have happened in our life because of that we have been able to walk through. But possibly it's, how do you literally love your neighbor? Are they going through something that they need something from you at the moment that would be just a small amount of whatever it might be? It might just be a kind word. It might be, "How are you?" Or it might be a meal. I'm not really sure. Or it could be the cashier at Harris Teeter. It could be of just asking, "How are you doing?" It's just kindness and love. And I think as a handle, as parents, it's those small things that teach our children how to see the world and how to love the world, in spite of who they are, in spite of what they believe, in spite of how they're acting. You might be the one to be the brave one, to be the kind one, because they're being the rude one at that moment. In my whole situation, or our whole situation, but specifically me, I had 3 adult children staring at me every day. We were all of us are, but we were in a very tight home and very close quarters and very strong personalities. So there was a lot of days that it was not the way that I wanted to be or act, but I knew how I respond and how I react to every situation that was going on. They were watching me. And what I didn't want was, I didn't want to become a different person in a moment of crisis than I would have been on a regular Tuesday. So it was a big deal that as I watched and I thought about, how am I responding right now? There was plenty of times I went on a walk and just screamed and hollered and said, "I can't do this."
What words did you use on that walk?
"Stuart, why did you do this to me?"
Those words,
You can't leave me here with these 3 adults.
Like I had a choice.
The interesting thing, and we're talking about parents, what do we do in light of this? And you hit it on the head. Every response that you gave in this time, 3 adult children were watching you. Your capacity to model John 13, 34, and 35 is what made the difference, right? "By this, all people will know that you're my disciples, by the way that you love one another." The way that you loved on those healthcare workers. I mean, if we had more time to hear Kellee talk about, even to this day, healthcare workers that aren't in relationship with Jesus reaching out to you, asking questions about who God is. That did not come as a result of what I would tend to do in an emergency room, is yell and demand and get upset. But it's saying, "I'm here for you. What is your name? I love you. I want to pray for you." Like that's that feet to the faith. And I think for some of us, you may be hearing this and it's like, okay, that's pretty that's not a big deal. It is a big deal because it's the fundamental to our faith. Going back to what you said about James, if in sports, if you don't have the fundamentals, the game doesn't work. I have a music background. I can love music all I do, but if I want to play something, I have to get the fundamentals down or it doesn't work and it doesn't make sense. So the fundamental of our faith is that loving other people the way that Jesus has. And as a parent, modeling that out consistently over time is where it sets us up to reverse the trends, to reverse these things and help our kids see a real faith, not a licking of the outside of the bottle, but drinking that example. Stuart, as we're wrapping up, I do have a question, and we talked about this in the last hour. But what questions would you ask us, our families? You're going to be back here next week. You're diving deep into some more stuff. So help set us up for next week. Give us some questions. Maybe we can ask around the dinner table. Maybe we ask our spouse. But what do you want us to wrestle with and ask ourselves between now and next week?
I would say, more than anything, to every parent, I think it's important. Kellee and I wrestle with these three questions all the time. Mm-hmm. First of all, parenting has been, is, and will forever be an amateur sport.
Yeah.
There is no perfect parent. Mm-hmm. So everybody that's a mom and dad, breathe a sigh of relief because there is no such thing as a perfect parent. We talked about that before. I think one question we have to ask ourselves as parents constantly, and one of the things that Kellee really leaned into, if I could frame it the way I think she was, we have to raise the children we have and not the children we were. And in doing that, the question, this begs the question, do I want to be right or do I want to have influence? Because I can have influence without being right, without having to be right. Mm-hmm. But I can never have influence if I have to be right. And if mom and dad, you're right. Now, obviously, there are some things, especially when our children are younger, we want them to know what is wrong and we want them to know what is right. Sure. But too many of us as parents are so dogmatic about being right that we've lost our capacity to influence our children. Mm-hmm. And here's a heads up to all of you who have young kids. Eventually, you're going to move from control to influence.
Yeah.
And even if your right is the absolute right, how are you going to move your child toward what is right if you don't have any influence? So that's one question we have to ask ourselves. And I think that question is really, really important. Second question I think we all have to ask ourselves is, how consistent are we in modeling the example, the life, the teachings of Jesus? It can get overwhelming thinking about all the things we need to tie on their head and talk about when they wake up, but how consistent are we in modeling who Jesus was, what Jesus taught, how Jesus lived? Maybe the reason why so many of our children, when they graduate high school, leave control to influence and they're led away from faith, maybe the reason why they're so easily led away from faith is because we haven't led them well into it.
Right. Yeah.
And mom and dad, that is not the responsibility of your pastors. It's ours. And then the last question, and Kellee touched on this a bit, what are you leaning the full weight of your existence on? Is it the economy? Is it your particular political party? Is it a particular presidential candidate? Is it the fact that whether or not we're going to have college football this year? Or are you leaning the full weight? Is it your health?
Yeah.
Or are you leaning the full weight of your existence on the person of Jesus?
Yeah.
Anything but him. And it's like leaning a ladder that you are on into fog. That will always crash.
Yeah.
And it also begs an even more important question that I know you want to talk about.
Yeah.
That being, who is this person, Jesus, and what does it mean to trust him?
Yeah. And here at Renovation Church, I mean, as we celebrated baptisms even last Sunday, that is the big question to begin this journey that we're going to go on for the next 8 weeks. the most important question is, do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Because if we're going to model Jesus, we've got to know Jesus. And for some of you, you may be here in person or maybe joining us online, and you're not there yet. You haven't made that decision to follow Jesus, and maybe today you're ready to take that next step, to put your faith and trust in Jesus. So if that's you, what I'm going to ask everyone to do is just bow your head and close your eyes. If you're joining us online, I'm going to lead you in a prayer, and just a prayer of surrender to submitting to Jesus Christ. So you can just pray this prayer for me. Dear God, thank you for sending your son Jesus to die for me. God, thank you for bringing him back to life, making a way for me to have a relationship with you. God, I pray that you would forgive me of all that I've done wrong, the mistakes I've made, things that I haven't done that are pleasing to you. And God, from this day forward, I commit my life to you. God, I thank you for bringing me into your family. God, I pray that you would walk with me from this day forth. I submit my life to you. We pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer this morning, one of the things we want to do is we want to know about it. And we want to know about it. And you can let us know through our website. You can let somebody out here at the tent know. If you're online, let us know in the chat. But also before we go, I think it's important, I just want to pray for you here, for those of you joining us online as parents and as a church, that God would give us the strength necessary to continue to lead our families in those fundamentals, those difficult fundamentals. So let's go back to God in prayer. God, I just lift up these people that are here, these people that are joining us online, the parents, the moms and dads, the mom and dad that feels overwhelmed because they don't feel like they have influence in the life of their teenager or in the life of their adult child. God, I pray that you would give them strength and courage. I pray that you would open their hearts and their minds in a way that they would see how to return to that table of influence with their children. God, I pray for the kids that are here that are far from you. God, I pray that you continue to allow your Holy Spirit to do a work of drawing them unto you. But God, I pray for strength and courage and boldness as a church, that we would be a people that are committed to living out, walking out the truth and the love of Jesus Christ. God, we thank you for this amazing time that we've had together this morning. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Well, church, let's give Stuart and Kellee a big hand. Thank you guys so much for being with us this morning.